We now bring in ESPN's Paul Carcaterra to weigh in. And Paul, this is, we were just talking about it before. This hits all of us in a specific way, and it hits us almost like it does the players, because there's nothing like get revved up to call a game, and it's as close as you can get to playing sometimes, and it's taken away. What was your reaction when the NCAA comes down with the ultimate hammer, canceling the championship weekend this year?
It's crushing. I don't play lacrosse anymore. I was fortunate enough to have 4 years at Syracuse University for Roy Simmons Jr. But my love for the game every single year and the relationships that I've built ever since I went to college and played lacrosse become more profound. They get deeper for me. So now I feel more for the players. I feel more for the coaches, the parents. I think of the bigger picture. I'm not going to sit here and feel bad for myself, but I know I'm in pain right now thinking about everything that could have been. And my initial reaction when the NESCAC broke the news, and then the Ivy League, it was more kind of centered around lacrosse. And it was like, why do we need to do this? Do we have to take these measures right now? Can we press the pause button and postpone the season? Extend the season? But then over like the last 24 hours, my mind and my focus has kind of shifted to the bigger picture. And that's, our country as a whole, our world as a whole. I think of all of these school-age children. I think of last night, I think the number was 5 million kids are home from school, with a lot of working parents and some single parents that have to deal with daycare and so many layers to this fallout. So my brain and my mind and my emotions shifted a little bit. And I think of little kids who come from poverty-stricken areas who rely on state and federal assisted school lunches. So it's just like my mind just spinning. I mean, I'm a guy that really has a tough time focusing to begin with. So this has been like a scatterbrain type of moment for me. But then I sat back and I said to myself, it's okay to have two different emotions, and you don't have to make excuses for yourself. So one emotion was the bigger picture of our nation as a whole and in our world as a whole, and trying to protect humanity. And then the other piece was the grieving process of not having lacrosse and not having sports. It's so much more than just the wins and losses on the field. It's the memories that are established, the relationships that you have, the bonds. I mean, like I said, I'm deeper involved in lacrosse now than I've ever been. I mean, this is my life outside my family. I don't know what it will be like come May weekends when the quarterfinals and the Final Four would roll around, or our Selection Sunday show that we do right before the playoffs, and we kind of celebrate the season. I feel so bad for the players, the coaches, the parents who just don't have the opportunity to create more memories, because there's only one team that wins at the end. And win, lose, or draw. I mean, BC women's lacrosse, I think, went to 3 national championships in a row, and they never won. But their journey was amazing, and getting to that moment was so profound in their lives that they will build off of those things because the journey took them even that close. Again, there's only one team that wins, but in men's lacrosse, there's 75 teams. That the journey and the experiences that they have on the buses and the trips and the practices and the early workouts, those are all golden moments in the 100 plus women's team. And this isn't just lacrosse. And that's why at first, when you think about it just as lacrosse, you think like, okay, the rest of the world's going to go on, and sports can be an escape for everyone else, but not us. But that's not even the case. When you cancel March Madness, I mean, that to me was the final straw too, because I think the big conferences, the Big Ten and the ACC in men's lacrosse, I think they were going to probably follow the suit of the NCAA in terms of March Madness. And if that got canceled, there was no way lacrosse was going to continue. But you just saw it trending in that direction. And it's super sad for everyone. It's super sad for everyone in athletics. It's super sad for everyone in life right now. Everyone's life is disrupted, and you can't sit here and feel bad for yourself. But don't make excuses that you shouldn't be hurt. You should be hurt when you love something and you're attached to something. You have emotion. It is perfectly fine to admit that this is really hard for me, even when it is sports. And people think of sports all the time. Ah, it's just sports, no big deal. But sports are relationships and sports are life lessons. And if you invest so much into it, it's so much of who you are as a person that of course you're going to feel this crazy pain, even when other things around in the world aren't good.
So, I mean, following up on that, you look at these seniors, and at the end of the day, like if you go into your last game of the regular season or the conference tournament or the NCAAs, you know if you lose that game, there's a chance that it's over. And you can kind of accept the fact that if I don't do what I need to do on the field or we don't as a team, it could be over and that could be it. This came so abruptly, and it just happened out of nowhere. So you've got guys across the country that you just weren't ready for it. If you have a chance to talk to some of the seniors, like guys at Penn State, like Grant Ament, Mac O'Keefe, and Michael Sowers at Princeton, Syracuse having such a good year, what's your message about the season just abruptly ending like this?
I think the only thing you can do, well, I'll take a step back. I don't have the answer for that. And I'm not going to sit here and tell you what the right answer is. I think just as a person involved in the sport and who loves this game and so much of my life revolves around it, you could only really tell people like that. And I have been in touch with some of the players that I have great relationships with, that I'm here to talk to them. And I think that in the coming weeks, because this isn't a situation where it's like, player X or Y blew out his knee and now is mourning because he can't play. Like the sport as a whole was taken from everyone. So I can only really just say to any player right now, I'm here if you need to talk. And I think that our feelings, as we really digest, will make really smarter decisions about our futures in regards to these players. And we could think through the whole process. We can do some reflecting. When I think about it, surface level, I always think like you have 4 years to play college lacrosse. And when you're 44 years old, like I am right now, you would do anything to have one of those years. So if the NCAA was to grant all these athletes another year of eligibility, which it sounds like they're moving in that direction, to me on the surface, it's like, you got to do it. But it's really hard to say that because every kid's situation is different. What about the player that's been at school for 5 years, like a Grant Ament, who's one of the greatest players the sport has seen from a passing standpoint? But he's been there 5 years and he's battled injuries. And the recruiting class that he originally came with, his best buddies, they left last year. And then he's here another year with this group and he's developed great relationships. There's so much emotion involved in that. And where are they along their whole school process? So every single situation is different. If you're an Ivy League kid, how do you just expect a kid that played in the Ivy League for 4 years, graduated, and now they don't have your master's program at the school? Or maybe they do, but the tuition's $70,000 a year. There's so many layers to this. So, for the kid that wants to get a master's, that loves lacrosse, and he's going to come back and the school's going to give the scholarship, that's kind of an easy answer. But what about the kid who's not on scholarship? He's never been on scholarship, or he goes to an Ivy League and he doesn't get athletic aid like some of these big conferences do because the Ivy League doesn't give athletic scholarships. Does mom and dad just write that $70,000 check again? And like, there's so many layers to this. So like each person, if I was to talk to them, requires their own little discussion. There's no blanket answer here because A, it's so fluid, but B, I mean, there's so many variables here. I mean, what are these teams going to do when they just say, yeah, everyone's coming back, but they have 50 lockers and now there's 60 kids and their travel budget doesn't allow for it? Or does the NCAA jump in here and say, lacrosse has 12 scholarships, but since we're adding another class, because essentially there'll be 5 classes on your team, we'll pay for that, extra 3 scholarships, if you think of it like from a proportional standpoint. There's so many layers to this. It's absolutely unprecedented. So I would say, like, unprecedented events in life oftentimes require unprecedented actions. So the NCAA is going to have to jump in here, and it's going to have to get really, really creative, because the fallout and everything that happens as a result is going to take some time. And this isn't a 1-year deal here. You grant eligibility for all these kids. It's not just the seniors coming back. It's the recruiting class coming in, and maybe those kids all end up redshirting now, and that class gets backloaded, and it's gonna affect recruiting for kids that are sophomores and juniors in high school. This isn't just a turnkey type of decision. This is going to require a lot of thinking and thought, and it's not just for the school and the player, it's the NCAA, it's everyone. There's so many moving parts here, man. It's so emotional too when you think about it, because of all the effort these kids put in. But I think our nation's in such a difficult situation here that it had to be done.
Oh, it certainly did, and you had to look after the safety of players and coaches and fans alike. And following up, because it has been reported the NCAA is looking into an extra year of eligibility for all spring sports athletes. Are you in favor? Obviously, you're right. There are tons of complications. Are you in favor of giving the guys at least an option?
Of course, unequivocally. These kids, in some cases, I mean, the Ivy League kids have played like 4 or 5 games. Not to mention, they haven't even gotten into conference play. Like, ACC teams haven't played each other. Big Ten teams haven't played each other. The number one goal in every locker room starts with, like, sometimes it's beat your rival, but in most cases, win your conference. These kids didn't even play conference lacrosse. You have to be in favor for that. The thing is, I've heard some people give these seniors another opportunity. No. Give everyone another opportunity. As much as the senior year is gold and these juniors and sophomores and freshmen will have another opportunity, 4 years is gold. So not 1 year should be taken away when you play such little in a spring season like that. But the fallout, like I mentioned earlier, how creative is the NCAA going to be? I mean, how much money and resources are they going to provide for this? Because it's not going to be as easy as hey, man, come back. You get to play again. There's another year here. And, there's so many details that need to be hashed out. I mean, roster sizes just grew 20% if all these kids come back, and scholarships have to come up. They can't lay around 12 like they are now in college lacrosse, because, you have some of these seniors who are ready to start their lives too, that had jobs lined up and accepted. So that's another piece of the equation. This isn't the NBA or the NFL. College lacrosse players oftentimes have internships in the summer and do so many things in regards to preparing themselves for the next stages of their lives, that it's going to be hard to say no to even that too. But in the end, I'm hopeful that the NCAA obviously gives a waiver for everyone, not just the seniors. But I'm also hopeful that it doesn't become crazy in terms of the transfer portal. That's another piece. What if these kids are granted another year of eligibility, and
wild.
They're free agents. They're free agents too. People really aren't talking about that right now. I mean, a lot of people think okay, you grant another year of eligibility. Does that year of eligibility have to be at the school that you just were playing for? I mean, think about it. It's in the Ivy League, they have a rule. It's not like you redshirt in the Ivy League. You can't redshirt. You have to withdraw from school. There's been some cases like Rob Pennell, when he was injured, he couldn't redshirt. He had to withdraw from school. I mean, so the Ivy League doesn't have a redshirt. They're going to have to do something that they've never done before and allow these kids to come back and to play as graduate students. That's never happened before. So if you have the Ivy League, which was maybe the best conference in college lacrosse with some of the best players, are they free agents? I don't know.
Which I think in the end of the day gets us to what makes it so hard for all these guys, because no matter what happens, and you could have everybody come back, but the situation's never the same as in the present. And you look at a school like a team like Syracuse or Cornell and how special the years were to this date. You can't replicate that if everybody comes back next year. You just can't replace it, which makes kind of the finality of this so difficult?
It's so difficult. You look at Penn State and the magical run they've had and arriving on the lacrosse stage in terms of like the big picture in the Final Four, and last year having one of the most explosive offenses. Statistically, you put it there with the Syracuse 1990 offense with the Gates and Tom Marichek. This was to be potentially a special year. And yeah, they've had their bumps, and they lost to Yale and Cornell, but I think if they fix some of the pieces, they could certainly have won a national title. It would have been their school's only national title. I mean, is Grant Ament, who's a year older than everyone in his class already because he's redshirted due to injury, is he going to come back for a sixth year? I'm not saying he is or he isn't, but it's hard to fathom that, like you said, all the pieces from the prior team make next year the same, because it won't. There'll be some players that come back, some that don't. There'll be some freshmen that would have played that maybe won't now. Changes the dynamic of the locker room. It changes the culture of the locker room. It changes just the overall climate of every single team. Every single team, like you said, is different, even if you bring everyone back. Because if you bring everyone back, you still have a new freshman class. And what if some of those freshmen now have to redshirt? What if some of those freshmen beat out upperclassmen? And it's just from a chemistry and just overall vibe. Every locker room's different.
Yeah, and I mean, even games like the Cornell-Penn State game, or the last game we had a chance to do here on LSN, one bounce of that ball goes differently. Penn State wins the game. Cornell's not the number 2 team in the country, and you don't know what that could have meant by the end of the year. You can't replicate everything that happens, and it's tough to swallow for a lot of players, and you understand why it's tough. You understand why they had to do it, but you understand why it's tough.
Yeah, and that's okay. And I think what you just said is the most important thing. You understand why this has all happened, and you understand why sports had to go on a hiatus, and in some cases canceled. In lacrosse's case, canceled. You understand that, and if you have a mind that thinks through things, it's hard to say right now, by the current climate of our country and our world, that we didn't make the right decision as a group, right? You have to think the NCAA and everyone that was making these really, really hard decisions had the best medical experts in the world advising them, right? So you're not going to question that. But it is okay to still feel upset. It's still okay to feel like there's a void. It's still upset to feel like something was taken from you. Like, that's the biggest thing for me. Is I'm confident in saying that I have multiple emotions in regards to this. One emotion is it was the right thing. It had to happen. The other emotion is I'm really going to miss lacrosse. Like, I'm going to be lost. And every kid that played this year, male or female, or played another spring sport, they're going to feel lost. When the dust settles on this thing, man, and we're sitting here and hopefully we're in a way better situation health-wise in say 6 weeks or a month or whatever it will be. It's going to be really hard. It's going to be hard for people. It's really going to be, because people put so much of this into their lives, and you understand. And at first I was like, why couldn't we just hit the pause button? And there's so many variables behind all this, and a part of me still thinks, why didn't we hit the pause button and reassess in 4 or 5 weeks? But there's so many pieces to this. Like, if you hit the pause button, do you extend the season? If you extend the season, who's going to take care of these athletes when school's out? Are we still going to have the facilities that we were planning on having in the NCAA tournament? If it does get postponed and players then are due back on campus, is there a buffer period where they're back with their team and getting in shape, because the rest of the student body's gone, taking online classes in most of these cases? So if you did turn the key back on, do you just start playing games again? Do you reschedule them? Do you start as if the season was that weekend, that next weekend on the calendar, just go with it? And who wins these conferences, and where do these AQ goes? And now that the Ivy was set in the beginning that they weren't going to have lacrosse, if all those other conferences did, what would that season been like? So there's so many unknowns. I think there were more questions. The more I think about it, there's more questions if you were to postpone the season. And trust me, Trust me, if we could have postponed it, I would have been all for it. But there are more questions if you postpone than answers.
Yeah, and that's what I think the NCAA was probably dealing with when they just said, you know what, let's wipe this out, give ourselves lots of time to figure out, the health and safety of everybody and pick things up in the fall. It's hard because you know what the thing is though, you can't erase the memories we saw already, like Syracuse starting undefeated, or that Penn State Cornell game, or UMass upsetting Yale, the Penn State Yale game. Like, you can't erase those memories. They still exist. They may not mean quite as much because we didn't have it at the end of the year, but they still exist, and we still had an exciting first couple of months.
We did. You'll never erase those memories. The saddest part, though, Travis, is there were so many more memories to be had.
It's true. It's true. Kark, hey, we appreciate the time. Thank you. Stay safe to you and your family, and we'll talk again soon.
You as well. Thanks.